Rise Within, inspired by Neville Goddard. This is one of Neville Goddard's most profound stories, a tale that reveals the forgotten power within us all. Today we'll explore how Edward's journey can help you rediscover your dreams and rise above life's challenges. The Forgotten Dream, Neville Goddard's powerful lesson to rise within. Before us lies a forgotten dream, a timeless lesson from Neville Goddard. It is a journey of imagination, persistence, and the rediscovery of inner power. This is Edward's story, and perhaps yours too.
Edward Mercer's alarm clock buzzed every morning at precisely 6:30 a.m. Without fail, he would swing his legs over the edge of the bed, his feet meeting the worn rug that had sat there for over a decade. His slippers were always placed at the same angle, ready for his routine to begin. Breakfast was predictable. 2 slices of toast, lightly buttered, paired with a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream. He ate in silence, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the otherwise still kitchen. Edward's walk to work followed an unchanging path. He passed the same bakery where the scent of freshly baked bread wafted into the air, though he never ventured inside. He crossed the same park, nodding politely to joggers and dog walkers he didn't know by name. By 8 a.m. sharp, he was seated at his desk, shuffling through paperwork that seemed to replenish itself endlessly. Days blurred into weeks, and weeks into years. If asked to recount his life, Edward would struggle to differentiate one day from the next. The monotony was so ingrained that it felt like a second skin, comfortably suffocating. What does it mean to truly live? Is life simply a series of actions repeated until time runs out? Or is there something more, something deeper, waiting to be uncovered? Edward's life was like a still pond, undisturbed by ripples or waves. But what happens when the surface remains unbroken for too long? Do we lose sight of what lies beneath? Do we forget that the pond is connected to rivers, to oceans, to the endless flow of life itself? And what happens when we stop dreaming? Does the world shrink, become smaller, confined to the edges of what we know? Or does it disappear entirely, leaving only shadows of what could have been? These were not questions Edward asked himself. Not yet. But deep within the quiet corridors of his mind, something stirred, restless and waiting to be awakened. Edward couldn't pinpoint when it had happened, but somewhere along the way he had stopped imagining. As a boy he had spent hours creating elaborate worlds in his mind, worlds filled with knights and castles, spaceships and distant planets. He had once believed he would become an author, spinning stories that would inspire others the way books had inspired him. But life, with its unrelenting demands, had a way of stealing such dreams. First came the small sacrifices, skipping writing sessions to focus on exams, choosing a stable career over his passion. Then came the larger ones, shelving his typewriter when the rent was due, declining invitations to writing workshops because of more important obligations. Now, when Edward tried to remember those dreams, they felt distant, like a melody he could no longer hum. Yet the yearning remained, a quiet ache in his chest that flared up at odd moments, when he passed a bookstore or when he saw children playing make-believe in the park. It wasn't sadness exactly, but a hollow kind of longing, as if some vital piece of himself had been misplaced. He felt like a man wandering through a house with locked doors, knowing the key was somewhere but unable to find it. Edward had not given up on life, but he had stopped living for something. And though he didn't yet realize it, the part of him that dreamed, that hoped, that dared to imagine was waiting. Patiently, quietly, for him to remember. The evening began like any other. The moon hung low in the sky, a pale silver disk casting its soft light over the quiet streets. Edward walked the familiar path home, his footsteps a steady rhythm against the pavement. But that night, as he approached the corner where he always turned left, something caught his eye. To his right was an alleyway he had never noticed before. Narrow and shadowed, it seemed out of place amidst the orderly streets he walked daily. The cobblestones glistened faintly, as though kissed by dew, and the faintest whisper of wind wound through the alley, carrying with it an almost musical quality. Edward hesitated. The logical part of his mind urged him to continue on his usual route, but something, curiosity perhaps, or an inexplicable pull, drew him toward the alley. As he stepped into its shadows, the world seemed to shift. The air grew cooler, heavier, as though he had crossed into another realm. The walls of the alley were lined with weathered brick, their surfaces etched with the marks of time. The faint scent of damp earth rose from the cobblestones, mingling with the distant aroma of something sweet, vanilla maybe, or an old perfume lingering in the breeze. As Edward moved deeper into the alley, the sounds of the city faded behind him. The occasional hum of a passing car and the distant chatter of voices were replaced by a profound silence, broken only by the faint rustle of the breeze. His footsteps on the cobblestones seemed louder here, echoing softly off the brick walls. Then he saw it. The shop was small and unassuming, tucked between two towering buildings as though it had been placed there deliberately, waiting to be found. Its sign, hanging from a wrought-iron bracket, swayed gently in the breeze. The letters were so faded they seemed to melt into the wood, their meaning obscured by time. The window display was simple, almost minimalist. A single book rested on a red velvet cloth, its leather cover illuminated by a flickering lantern within. The light seemed to dance across the book's surface, highlighting its intricate stitching and worn edges. Edward approached slowly, drawn to the book as if it held some unspoken promise. His hand hovered over the door handle for a moment before he pushed it open. The door creaked, a long, low sound that sent a shiver down his spine. The air inside was thick, carrying the scent of aged paper, leather, and something floral that he couldn't quite place. The shop was dimly lit, its walls lined with shelves that stretched to the ceiling. Books filled every inch of space, their spines unmarked, their titles hidden. A single oil lamp sat on the counter, casting a warm, flickering glow that softened the room's edges. Behind the counter stood the shopkeeper. The man was tall and lean, his face lined with age but his eyes sharp and bright. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he wore a suit that, though slightly worn, seemed to belong to another era. He said nothing, his gaze fixed on Edward as though he had been expecting him all along. Edward stood just inside the door, his gaze moving from the shopkeeper to the shelves and back again. There was a stillness in the room, a sense of time slowed to a crawl. Imagine yourself here. The air is heavy with mystery, every detail pulling you further into the unknown. What would you do? Would you step forward, or would you turn back, retreating to the safety of the familiar? The shopkeeper's voice broke the silence, low and steady. You've come for the book. Edward blinked, startled. The book? The man gestured to the window. It's been waiting for you. Edward hesitated, his heart racing. The words felt strange, almost absurd, and yet they resonated deeply. Slowly he stepped toward the counter, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet beneath him. As he reached the book, he paused. The leather was smooth, its deep brown colour almost black in the dim light. The edges of the pages shimmered faintly, as if they were gilded with gold dust. Take a moment. Run your fingers over the cool leather. Feel its weight in your hands. What secrets does it hold? What stories could it tell? Edward turned to the shopkeeper, who watched him with a quiet intensity. What is this place? Edward asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The shopkeeper smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. It is what you need it to be. Edward's fingers hovered over the book's cover for a moment longer, as though the act of opening it would change something irrevocable. The leather felt cool and smooth beneath his fingertips, worn in some places but sturdy, as though it had weathered time itself. When he finally opened it, the pages whispered softly against each other, the sound delicate and almost melodic. The texture of the paper was unlike anything he had ever felt, thick and slightly rough, as though handcrafted, each page holding its own subtle imperfections. The ink was deep and rich, shimmering faintly in the dim light. But what truly caught Edward's breath was what was written there. The words weren't just words. They were fragments of dreams he had forgotten, stories he had imagined as a child, a boy wandering through a magical forest, a spaceship soaring through galaxies, a quiet love story unfolding beneath the stars. Each page was a mirror reflecting pieces of his soul, fragments of creativity he had once nurtured but had long since abandoned. The further he turned the pages, the more familiar it all felt, as though the book had been written for him, by him. Edward would retreat to his bedroom every night, the world outside fading into silence. In his mind, he constructed a grand library, rich with the scent of aged books and the soft golden glow of antique lamps. The walls stretched endlessly, lined with shelves brimming with boundless wisdom and possibility. At first, the imagery was faint, like a picture drawn on a fogged window. He struggled to maintain the clarity, feeling silly as his mind wandered to mundane thoughts. Yet, with persistence, the library grew vivid. Each crack in the wooden floor, the cool leather of an armchair, and the weight of a book in his hand became strikingly real. Edward began to look forward to these nightly sessions, not as a chore, but as a gateway to a world where anything was possible. Doubt would creep in like shadows in his library, whispering that this was a futile exercise. How can imagining a library change my life? Edward wondered, frustration tightening his chest. Yet, inspired by Neville Goddard's teachings, that imagination was the root of all creation. He refused to give in. Some nights were harder than others, but he persisted, weaving stories of his success as if they had already happened. Over time, his persistence transformed these sessions into moments of joy and empowerment. The library became not just an escape, but a workshop where he could craft his dreams into reality. The first sign of change came with a writing competition. Edward submitted a short story he had envisioned while visiting his library. To his surprise, he won first place. The recognition ignited a newfound confidence that spread through his life like wildfire. Soon, synchronicities followed. A chance meeting with a renowned editor at a cafe, an email from a publisher who stumbled across his blog, and even an invitation to speak at a creative writing seminar. These events felt almost magical, as though the universe was conspiring in his favor. Each success reaffirmed the power of his imagination and the reality of what he had created within. Reflecting on his journey, Edward came to understand imagination as a muscle, one that grows stronger with consistent use. Just as lifting weights builds physical strength, his nightly visualization sessions had fortified his creative spirit and belief in himself. Quoting Neville Goddard, he would often remind others, "The world you imagine is the world you create." Edward became a living testament to this truth. By dedicating time to strengthen his inner vision, he had reshaped his reality in ways he never thought possible. Edward's story isn't just about success, it's about transformation. From a man riddled with doubt to one who commands his destiny, he proves that imagination is more than daydreaming. It's the blueprint for your future. His nightly journeys into the library of his mind are a reminder to us all. Whatever you dream, you can create. Edward's return to the alley wasn't just a physical journey. It was a quest for understanding. The alley had become a symbol of his past, where his doubts, fears, and longing for change had once converged. As he approached, the narrow pathway seemed alive with memories. Each crack in the cobblestones, every shadow that danced on the walls, mirrored his inner world, the uncertainties he had faced and the transformation he had undergone. The alley was no longer just a location. It was a reflection of his search for closure, for answers about the enigmatic shopkeeper and the lessons that had sparked his journey. When Edward reached the spot where the shop had once stood, his heart sank. The quaint storefront with its aged wooden door and shelves filled with peculiar trinkets was gone. In its place was an empty lot, overgrown with weeds and strewn with forgotten debris. He stood in silence, the mystery wrapping around him like a shroud. How could the shop, so vivid in his memory, simply vanish? He replayed every detail in his mind. The shopkeeper's cryptic words, the golden key he had been handed, and the books that had whispered of untapped potential. The shop's disappearance felt surreal, as if it had existed only to guide him and then dissolved, its purpose fulfilled. Edward's thoughts turned inward. Was the shop ever real? Or was it a creation of my own imagination, a manifestation of my deepest desires? He began to wonder if its disappearance was a lesson in itself, that the power to transform his life had always been within him, and the shop had merely shown him the way. The missing shop left Edward with more questions than answers, but it also sparked a profound realization. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but experienced. He stood in the empty alley, letting the moment wash over him, feeling gratitude instead of frustration. As listeners, we are invited to consider the meaning of the shop's disappearance. Was it a physical place, or a figment of Edward's imagination? Could it have been a metaphor for the fleeting nature of inspiration, or the importance of seizing the moment? By lingering on this mystery, we are reminded that not all journeys offer clear answers. Sometimes, the most profound lessons come from embracing the unknown and trusting the process. Edward's return to the alley wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a deeper understanding. The empty space where the shop had stood was not a loss but a gift, leaving room for him to build something even greater within himself. As he walked away, the alley transformed in his mind from a place of mystery to a chapter in his journey, one that would forever remind him of the power of imagination, faith, and the courage to seek the extraordinary in the ordinary. What does it mean to live? As Edward retraced the steps of his journey, the philosophical question posed at the start, what does it mean to live, echoed in his mind. At the beginning of his transformation, life had felt like a series of obligations and routines, with little room for wonder or growth. He had been existing, not truly living. Through his experiences, Edward came to see that living isn't about merely going through the motions. To live is to dream, to imagine, and to act with purpose. It's about finding the courage to explore your passions and push beyond the limits of what you think is possible. Living, Edward realized, means embracing the creative power within you. It's not about waiting for life to happen. It's about actively shaping it with your imagination and will. How do we reclaim our forgotten dreams? The second question, how do we reclaim our forgotten dreams, became even more significant as Edward reflected on his journey. At the start, his dreams of writing and achieving something meaningful felt distant, buried beneath self-doubt and life's distractions. The mysterious shop had awakened those dreams, acting as a mirror to his potential. Reclaiming our dreams, Edward understood, requires reconnecting with the imaginative child within us, the part of us unburdened by fear or cynicism. It means allowing ourselves to visualize the life we desire and taking deliberate steps toward it, no matter how small they may seem. Dreams don't disappear. They simply wait for us to rediscover them through faith, persistence, and self-belief. The shop and the book as manifestations of his imagination. Standing in the empty alley, Edward had an epiphany. The shop and the book were not external forces, but manifestations of his own imagination. They represented the creative power he had forgotten, now brought to life through his need for change. The shopkeeper's cryptic words, the golden key, and the book of blank pages, these were metaphors for the tools Edward already possessed. The key symbolized his ability to unlock his potential. The blank pages reflected the unwritten story of his life, waiting for him to fill it with purpose and vision. This realization was both humbling and empowering. The external mystery of the shop's disappearance dissolved, leaving behind the profound truth that Edward's imagination was the true architect of his transformation. The shop had been a catalyst, guiding him to trust the creative force within himself. The power of imagination. Edward's journey concludes with a profound understanding. The answers to life's greatest questions aren't found outside of us, but within. The shop's disappearance was a reminder that the external world often mirrors our inner reality. When we believe in our power to create, the world around us begins to align with our vision. He now knew that living fully means embracing the limitless potential of the mind and heart. By reclaiming his forgotten dreams, Edward learned that imagination is not just a tool, it is the essence of what makes life meaningful. As Edward walked away from the alley for the last time, he carried with him a quiet confidence. The shop, the book, the journey, all of it had been a lesson in his own creative power. And though the shop was gone, its essence remained, a testament to the idea that within each of us lies the power to dream, to create, and to transform our lives. For us, Edward's story leaves a question to ponder. What would your life look like if you trusted your imagination and dared to reclaim your forgotten dreams? Take a moment to imagine it. Close your eyes and step into your own library of dreams. What would you create? What forgotten desires or possibilities might you rediscover? Remember, the power to transform your life lies within your own imagination. As Neville Goddard taught, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Like Edward, the key to a fulfilled life starts with believing in your dreams as if they are already real. Your imagination is the seed, and your faith is the soil. Tonight, why not start your own journey? Create your sacred space, your own library, garden, or sanctuary of possibilities. Spend just 5 minutes a day imagining the life you desire. Watch how the universe begins to respond. I'd love to hear your story. What dreams will you dare to imagine? Share your thoughts in the comments below, or reach out. We're on this journey together. Thank you for joining me on Edward's journey. Remember, the world you imagine is the world you create. Until next time, keep dreaming, keep believing, and keep rising within.